this third Sunday of Epiphany, our Gospel reading is from John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. And it's about the situation in the wedding in Cana in Galilee when Jesus changed the water into wine. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So we're looking today at the first of those signs described in the fourth Gospel, John's Gospel. I've been on a break from contributing occasional sermons here in Crosswaite and haven't actually been involved now for well over a year. And the reason was that I had been developing cataracts in both eyes, and although I was by no means blind, I was finding it increasingly difficult to focus on my notes when performing public speaking. And so I felt that it was best really to withdraw until I had been able to have treatment. And I'm delighted to say that I've fairly recently had operations in both eyes to remove the cataracts and replace them with new lenses. And the contrast, the difference is stunning. But it's made me realise that that process of sight getting a little worse had been a gradual process over years rather than months. And I didn't realise just how bad it had got until I had one eye done. It was actually back last May, and I had operations separated by a week. So for 1 week, I had one eye with the cataract still there, and the other one with a brand new lens, which gave me such good vision. And what I hadn't realised, I was seeing everything through a sort of sepia blur. So the focus wasn't good, and everything was tinged with a sort of beigey overwash. So when I was able to see clearly and with perfect appreciation of full colour, it was quite an astonishing experience. Now, I'm sharing this story because I think it is of some relevance to us with regard to the way we progress in faith. Because I think over time, the clarity of our belief and the excitement about our belief can become dimmed and dulled. In the book of Revelation, chapter 2, in the letter to the church at Ephesus, the writer says that they have lost their first love, and he's sad about that they're no longer the enthusiastic believers that they were originally. You can read about that in Revelation chapter 2. And then again in Hebrews, in the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 5, the writer complains about the believers because he says, "You still need to be fed on milk, and I'd hoped by now that you'd kind of grown up as believers and would be thinking more deeply for yourselves." Looking through a lens, well, we all do. We all look through lens, and sometimes we can both look at the same thing and see different and come to different conclusions. when we read our Bibles, we can read the same words and yet come to different conclusions. Epiphany is about Jesus being revealed as a very special baby who was to become the Messiah. He was potentially Messiah for the Jews, but not just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles as well. And the visit of the Magi was the first of a whole series of events which underlined this. The Magi were Gentiles, non-Jews, and yet they came to bow down and worship at the home of the infant baby Jesus. St. Paul describes how he was specially called to take the good news of Jesus to the Gentiles, not just to the Jews. This wedding at Cana, in today's media-focused world, would have drawn headlines, wouldn't it? I mean, there would have been questions about where this very generous amount of wine came from and how it happened. And if people were able to hear what Jesus apparently said to his mother Mary, Mary seems to have had something to do with the catering, and perhaps that was why she came to him and said, there's a problem, they're running out of wine. And Jesus' reply was, "Woman, it's not my time yet. Why do you come to me?" Well, in this day, Jesus might have been reported to the authorities for being less than respectful to a woman, let alone to his mother. There's been all sorts of discussion about whether Jesus would have changed water into alcoholic wine. There are plenty of well-meaning and well-intentioned Christians who feel very strongly that wine is taboo. And particularly over the years, there have been denominations which have made that an emphasis, and particularly from America and the temperance influence there, to the point where a lot of evangelical Christians have felt that it was, if they enjoyed a glass of wine or whatever, it was just a little bit dodgy. I can't say I've ever been particularly persuaded on that front. But when I was talking about the way that we look through a lens, those who would prefer to think that Jesus wouldn't have encouraged the drinking of wine try to persuade each other that the original Greek language in which this is reported has a word which actually means grape juice. And so that it's alleged that it was more ribena, the wine, that was being provided. They said that because actually they wanted the Bible to say something that they preferred. And that's looking through our own lens and wanting the Bible to say what we would like it to say. It seems to me to be perfectly obvious from the reaction of the person in charge of the feast and the remark, well, to the bridegroom, most people keep the poorer wine, the cheaper wine, till later, but you've saved the best till last. And the whole implication of the account was that it was alcoholic wine. And, the president of the feast said, you save the cheap stuff till later, because when people's palate has been dulled a little and they're nicely relaxed, then they won't notice the difference. So it's perfectly clear that, to me at any rate, that it was genuine wine that was being drunk at that wedding celebration. So the other thing, as well as the controversy about the wine, was Jesus really being rude when he said to his mother, "Woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come." It does sound a little rude to us. The New International, some versions of the Bible actually choose to translate with the word "dear woman" in order to make it seem just a little bit more respectable. Well, the reality is that the word uses just woman. But we only think that that's a bit rude because in our culture it would sound rude. People would perhaps even nowadays might say, "Hey man, how you doing?" And "Hey man, how you doing?" wouldn't be perceived as being rude to a man. My wife and I enjoy spending time in Spain, and we're a little bit familiar with the Spanish language. And it's quite common in Spanish conversation to refer to someone as hombre. Hombre, ¿qué tal? Man, how are you? And actually, it can be used when speaking to a woman as well. It's a way of speaking, it's a manner of speech, but hombre literally means man. So we need to understand that we see what we read in the Bible through a lens which comes from our own culture. So in our culture, if I said to my wife, "Woman, what you're doing now," I wouldn't be being very respectful and appropriately kind to my wife. I wouldn't dream of saying it. But in that culture, when Jesus said, "Woman, why do you involve me?" He wasn't being rude. It was just the way they spoke. And he said, "My time has not yet come." A title for my sermon today could be, "What does Jesus bring to the party?" What did Jesus bring to the party, and what does Jesus bring to the party? As a follower of Jesus, I want to know what he was like, because then I'll know what he is like today. Jesus was completely at ease attending the wedding celebrations, and he and his disciples were welcome guests. Now, if you, like me, know what it's like to wear a dog collar, you will know that this gives us a label of being religious, and people tend to be not necessarily all that comfortable having us present or being in our company, and certainly not so relaxed if there's a party going on. Now, Jesus was not perceived in that way at all. In fact, he was accused of being a friend of tax collectors and sinners. When people were attacking him, they said of John the Baptist, "You say he has a demon." But then Jesus, the Son of Man, came, eating and drinking, and you say, this is Jesus himself speaking, eating and drinking, and you say, "Here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." So, Jesus was very much at ease in the company of people. He loved being amongst people. The Baptist preacher, C.H. Spurgeon, who, well over a century ago now, actually during the 19th century, was a minister of perhaps one of the first so-called megachurches. The Metropolitan Tabernacle in London could accommodate 5,000 to 6,000 people, and he was a preacher who drew great crowds. And on one occasion he said this: "An individual who has no geniality about him had better be an undertaker and bury the dead, for he will never succeed in influencing the living." Outspoken indeed. Jesus wasn't at all sombre and perceived as a killjoy. He got on well with people. The occasion was a village wedding, a very ordinary couple. Jesus mixed with ordinary folk as well as with people of all stratas of society of his day. He went with ease, where those who felt they had status or reputation would hesitate to go. So the Pharisees wouldn't have gone where Jesus went. What does Jesus bring to the party? John presents this in his Gospel as the first of the miraculous signs which Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. The wedding at Cana only features in the fourth Gospel, but there are references in later Gospels which didn't make it into the New Testament. John wrote his Gospel with a particular purpose. At the very end, in John chapter 21 and verse 25, he says, "Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written." The writer presented his material towards the end of the first century and wrote in Ephesus in order to persuade all that Jesus was someone to be learned about, to be accepted, and to be followed. His purpose was to present to Jews and Gentiles alike the good news of Jesus. It was a gospel written with a purpose. The special baby who grew up to be a very special man, unlike any other. I'd like to close by saying, in answer to my question, what does Jesus bring to the party? Well, he brought to that wedding group 5 things in particular. He brought his presence. He was attending with his friends and his mother. It was a long drawn-out affair. Wedding festivities lasted for more than a day. There was a ceremony and an evening. The couple were accompanied round the streets by the longest route possible for folks to wish them well. They travelled under a canopy, accompanied by flaming torches. And then the honeymoon would be spent at home, and they were treated as a king and a queen, and they held open house for a week. It was a fun and joyous experience for them. Jesus, as a Jewish marriage of 2,000 years ago, was so very different in that time and culture. And when we debate nowadays about issues surrounding marriage, we must be careful that if we talk about marriage in biblical times, that we do actually take the trouble to find out exactly what it was like, and not again look through a lens of our own experience today. But Jesus brought his presence to that wedding. He brought his humanity. When he said to his mother, "My time has not yet come," in teenage language, it could have been, "Oh, mother, do I have to?" It was a real tension for Jesus, because the one who came to dwell among us had to wait for events to pan out as his Father had planned. And there was no hint when Jesus took action to solve the problem of the lack of wine, of any kind of showing off or showing what he could do. In fact, quite the reverse. And if you're familiar with the account of when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, you'll remember that the account describes the devil tempting him to turn stones into bread and kind of do tricks to impress people. That wasn't where he was at all. He was there, and he wanted to help because there was a need. So he acted out of compassion. He saw the need, the disappointment, the embarrassment that was about to unfold, and acted to meet that need. And of course, the way in which he acted demonstrated his power. And then fifthly, his generosity. More than enough wine. Wine of the best quality. You save the best until last. So what did Jesus bring to the party? He brought his presence, he brought his humanity, he brought his compassion, his power, and his generosity. If only we could successfully portray that Jesus to the world around us, then I think the church would have far more people attending than it does at the moment. The church does have an image problem, and the problem is that we have lost our contact with vast proportions of the population. The answer has to be to look at ourselves and ask where we're going wrong, and then to look at Jesus, recognize that he was at ease amongst people, he enjoyed being with people, they respected him, they looked to him when they had their need, and on this occasion at the wedding in Galilee, he brought a lot to the party. He brought his presence, his humanity, his compassion, his power, and his generosity. Oh, that we could be true followers of him and show in our presence in the world and our humanity the compassion of Jesus, the power of Jesus and the generosity of Jesus. Amen.